In 1985, the most creative mind in Silicon Valley was escorted out of the building he built, not fired by a stranger, not let go by a competitor, fired by his own company, the company that had his name on it, the company that lived in his blood, the company he had built from nothing, from a garage, from a dream, from an obsession, so total it consumed everything around it, including the people who loved him. They changed the locks. They took his projects. They reassigned his team. They made it quietly, efficiently, brutally clear, you are no longer needed here. And Steve Jobs, 29 years old, worth $200 million, and more lost than he had ever been in his life, walked out of Apple's doors and did not know if he would ever walk back in. Most people, when they tell you this story, skip to the ending. They skip to the comeback, the return, the iPhone, the revolution. But the part that matters, the part that will change how you see every loss you have ever suffered, is what happened in between. Because what Steve Jobs discovered in the wilderness between being fired and becoming a legend is the most important thing he ever learned. And he said so himself. Stay with me. The year is 1976. A 21-year-old college dropout is sitting in a garage in Los Altos, California. He has no money. He has no degree. He dropped out of Reed College after one semester because he could not bear to watch his adoptive parents spend their savings on an education he was not sure he believed in, so he left. He slept on floors. He returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposit to buy food. He walked 7 miles across town every Sunday to get a free meal at the Hare Krishna temple. And yet, and this is the part that matters, he was not defeated. He was searching. He was auditing calligraphy classes at Reed not because they were useful, but because they were beautiful. And something in him could not separate beauty from purpose. He was sitting in on lectures he had no academic reason to attend, because his mind was a fire that could not be told what to burn. In that garage, with his friend Steve Wozniak beside him, he built a computer. Not a computer the way we think of computers now. A circuit board, a box, a thing that most people who saw it could not understand and did not want. But Jobs could see it. He could see past the circuit board to the living room, past the living room to the school, past the school to the entire future of how human beings would interact with technology and information and each other. He could see it the way some people see weather coming before it arrives, not as a prediction but as a certainty. Apple Computer Company was incorporated on April 1st, 1976. By 1984, they had released the Macintosh, one of the most revolutionary personal computers ever built, in a commercial that aired during the Super Bowl and was watched by over 90 million people and is still studied in marketing schools around the world 40 years later. Steve Jobs was 30 years old. He had already changed the world once, and then the board of directors voted to remove him from the company he had created. You need to understand what this actually felt like. Not in the business sense, not in the career sense, in the human sense. Apple was not just a job to Steve Jobs. It was not just an achievement or a milestone, or a company he happened to found. Apple was his identity. From the age of 21, everything he was, every ounce of his obsessive creative energy, every vision he had ever had about what technology could become, every sleepless night and brutal argument and impossible demand he made of the people around him, all of it was poured into Apple like water into a vessel. Apple was the vessel, and now the vessel had been taken away. He later described that period as devastating, as disorienting in a way that had no bottom to it. He said he did not know who he was without Apple. He said he felt like he had let down the entire generation of entrepreneurs who had looked to him. Think about that. Not the public humiliation, though that was real and it was brutal, played out in newspapers and business journals and Silicon Valley gossip. The golden boy discarded, the visionary who could not manage his own company. Not the financial loss, though Jobs did sell almost all of his Apple stock, a decision that would cost him billions. But the identity loss. The loss of knowing who you are when the thing that told you who you were is gone. We do not talk about this enough. We talk about failure in terms of money and opportunity and status. We measure it in lost revenue and missed promotions, and careers that did not go the way they were supposed to. But the real devastation of a major loss is not what it takes from your bank account. It is what it takes from your story. Steve Jobs had a story, a clean, brilliant, ascending story. Boy genius builds computer in garage. Boy genius changes the world. Boy genius becomes a legend at 30. That story was over now. And in its place was something uglier, more complicated, more human. A man in his late 20s sitting in his enormous empty house in Woodside, California, with more money than he could spend and nothing he wanted to do with any of it. He described the house as haunted, not by ghosts, by potential, by all the things it was supposed to represent that he could no longer access. He bought furniture obsessively and then returned it because nothing felt right. He ate alone. He cycled through periods of furious energy and complete paralysis. He was, for perhaps the first time in his life, truly lost. And here is where the story becomes dangerous. Because this is the moment, this exact moment of total disorientation and loss of identity, that most people make the worst decision of their lives. They shrink. They find something smaller and safer that will never hurt them as badly. As the big dream did, they build walls around whatever is left. They call it maturity. They call it being realistic. They call it learning from experience. What they are really doing is making sure they never have to feel this particular pain again. And in doing so, they guarantee that they never feel the particular joy that lives on the other side of it. Steve Jobs almost did this. Almost. Here is what saved him. He still loved what he did. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but hear it fully. Underneath the humiliation and the disorientation and the grief, and the paralysis underneath all of it, like bedrock under earthquake damage, was the fact that Steve Jobs still woke up every morning thinking about technology and design and the intersection of beauty and function and what it meant to build something that changed how human beings experienced their own lives. The company was gone. The identity was shattered. But the love was still there, and he made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a press conference, not a manifesto, a quiet decision made alone that he was going to start again. He founded a new computer company called Next. He invested in a small animation studio that was struggling, a studio you may have heard of, called Pixar. And he fell in love with a woman named Lorene Powell, whom he would later marry and call the smartest and most beautiful person he had ever met. And in the wilderness years, the years that the world wrote off as Steve Jobs' failure, his eclipse, his irrelevance, something was happening that no one outside of him could see. He was being rebuilt, not restored to what he was before, not returned to the Steve Jobs of 1984, rebuilt into something that could not have existed without the fall. At Next, working without the pressure of running the world's most famous technology company, he developed an operating system so advanced that when Apple, struggling desperately without him, hemorrhaging money, watching its market share collapse, when Apple came looking for a new operating system to buy in 1996, the one they chose was Next. The operating system Steve Jobs built after being fired from Apple became the foundation of every Apple product that exists today. The firing did not interrupt the story. The firing was the story. He returned to Apple in 1997. Within a year, he had restructured the company. Within 3 years, he had launched the iMac. Within 5 years, the iPod. Within a decade, the iPhone, a device so far ahead of its time that its competitors literally did not know how to respond to it. Apple became the most valuable company in the history of the world. And Steve Jobs stood in front of a Stanford University graduating class in 2005 and said words that I need you to hear as if he is speaking them directly to you right now. He said, "I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The best thing, not in spite of the pain, because of what the pain made possible." And now we get to the part of this story that belongs to you, because Steve Jobs did not go through all of that so that we could put him on a poster and sell motivational calendars. He went through it so that we could understand something true about how extraordinary lives are actually built. The first lesson, and it is the hardest one, is this: the loss that destroys your story is the loss that frees you to find your real one. Steve Jobs' story before he was fired was brilliant. It was ascending. It was everything a success story is supposed to be. But it was also a cage. Because he was Steve Jobs of Apple. He was the Macintosh guy. He was locked by success, by identity, by the weight of what he had already built, into a version of himself that had a ceiling. The firing blew the ceiling off. Suddenly he was nobody's founder, nobody's visionary, just a man with resources and time and a mind that could not stop moving. And in that open space, in that terrifying, disorienting, identityless open space, he built things he could never have, built while he was still defining himself by what he had already done. Think about the story you are currently living. Think about the identity you have built around your job, your relationship, your role, your achievement. Think about how completely you have become the thing you have been doing. And now ask yourself, what would you build if that story ended tomorrow? Not what would you survive? What would you build? Because your greatest work may be waiting on the other side of your greatest loss. The second lesson is this. The heaviness of the fall determines the height of the return. Steve Jobs did not have a minor setback. He did not lose a promotion or a project or a client. He lost everything that defined him. And the return was proportional to the fall. We want the comeback without the collapse. We want the resurrection without the death. But it does not work that way. The reason Jobs returned to Apple and built the iPhone, the reason he had the clarity and the vision and the ruthless focus to create products that changed civilization, was precisely because he had already been stripped of everything once and had learned what was left. He knew what he was made of, not from a motivational speech, not from a business book, from the actual experience of losing everything he thought he was and discovering that the most essential part of him, the love, the vision, the creativity could not be taken. You are in your fall right now. Some of you know it. You feel it every morning when you wake up and the weight is there before you even open your eyes. Some of you are trying not to know it. You are keeping busy, keeping moving, not letting yourself sit still long enough to feel the full size of what you have lost. Either way, hear this. The fall is not the end. The fall is the forge. The third lesson, and Jobs spoke about this directly in his Stanford speech, one of the most important speeches ever delivered, is this. You can only connect the dots looking backward. When Jobs dropped out of Reed College, he did not stop showing up. He started auditing the classes that interested him. One of those classes was calligraphy, the art of beautiful handwriting, spacing, typography. He had no idea why he was drawn to it. He had no strategic reason for being there. It was pure curiosity, pure love of beauty for its own sake. 10 years later, when he was designing the Macintosh, he built into it the first computer with beautiful typography, multiple typefaces, proportional spacing, the things he had learned from a calligraphy class he had no reason to take. He said, if he had never dropped out, if he had stayed on the prescribed path, he would have never wandered into that class, and the Mac would never have had beautiful typography. And since Windows copied the Mac, no personal computer in the world would have it. One seemingly purposeless detour, one moment of following curiosity without a destination, changed the aesthetic of every computer built in the last 40 years. The dots you cannot connect right now are the most important ones. The thing you are going through that makes no sense, the detour, the loss, the unexpected left turn that derailed the plan you had so carefully constructed. You cannot see where it leads from where you are standing, but it leads somewhere. It always leads somewhere. And when you look back, not if, when, you will see that the path was not random, that something was being built from every piece of it. You have to trust that, not blindly, not naively, but with the specific, grounded, earned trust of someone who has made the decision to keep moving. Even when the destination is not visible, the fourth lesson is perhaps the most uncomfortable one. The qualities that make you difficult are often the same. Qualities that make you extraordinary. Steve Jobs was by every account not an easy person. He was demanding beyond reason. He was capable of cruelty in his critiques. He rejected work that other people considered excellent because it did not meet a standard that lived only in his head. He made people cry. He made people quit. He made people, and this is documented, do things they did not believe were possible simply because he refused to accept the word impossible. The board that fired him cited these qualities as reasons he was unmanageable, and they were not wrong. He was unmanageable, but the same obsessive, uncompromising, infuriating insistence on perfection that made him impossible To work for was the exact same force that produced the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, products of such revolutionary beauty and functionality that they did not just sell well. They changed behavior. They changed how human beings communicate and create and consume and live. The world tried to sand down his edges, and every time it succeeded, it produced an Apple that was average. Every time he was allowed to be fully, uncomplicatedly, brutally himself, the full unedited version of Steve Jobs, the result was something the world had never seen. The parts of you that the world keeps asking you to tone down, the intensity, the obsession, the vision that other people cannot see yet, the standard you hold that no one else around you seems to share. These are not your flaws. These are your signature. Stop apologizing for them. Start aiming them. I want to take you to one specific moment. It is 2005, Stanford University. Steve Jobs is 50 years old. 1 year earlier, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He sat with that diagnosis for 9 months before having surgery. He later said he regretted waiting, that the fear of what the surgery would find made him delay in ways that were not rational. He was not invincible. He was not immune. He was a man sitting with a diagnosis that told him his time was limited, and he was afraid. And he stood in front of those graduating students, thousands of young people at the beginning of their lives, their whole stories ahead of them, and he told them about the firing. He told them about the wilderness years. He told them about Next and Pixar and Lorene and the slow, invisible rebuilding of a man who had lost everything. And then he said something that I need you to hear. Not as a quote, not as a slogan on a coffee mug, but as a truth delivered by a man who had paid the full price for it. He said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't waste it living someone else's life." He said, "Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking." He said, "Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice." And then he said the words that have echoed through every person who has ever felt the gap between the life they are living and the life they know they are capable of. He said, "Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Stay hungry. In a world that will try every single day to satisfy you with something less than what you were made for, stay hungry. Stay foolish. In a world that will mock your vision and question your sanity and tell you to be practical and realistic and to manage your expectations. Stay foolish enough to believe that you can build something that has never existed before. Because here is what the firing of Steve Jobs from Apple actually was. It was not a punishment. It was not a failure. It was the universe refusing to let an extraordinary man stay comfortable in an ordinary version of his potential. The universe does this. It does it brutally. It does it without your permission. It does it in ways that feel like the end of everything. But it does it in service of something you cannot yet see. The door that just closed. The relationship that just ended. The job that just disappeared. The dream that just collapsed in your hands like is not evidence that you are finished. It is evidence that where you were is not where you are meant to stay. Steve Jobs built Apple. Then Apple cast him out. Then the wilderness rebuilt him into something that could build the world. And he came back. Not the same man who left. Something larger. Something harder and more refined and more certain of itself. Something that the version who walked out of those doors in 1985 could not have been. Because that version had never yet been broken and put back together. He came back, and you will too. Whatever wilderness you are in right now, whatever version of being cast out of the thing that defined you, you are not finished. You are being rebuilt. And what is being built is going to be more than what was taken. So what do you do with this? You do not simply watch this video and feel inspired for an hour and then go back to the same smallness you were living before you pressed play. That would be an insult to the pain you have already endured. Because here is what I know about you. You would not be watching this if you had not already lost something. You would not be here in this particular video, at this particular moment, if some part of you was not sitting with a question about whether the thing that fell apart was actually the end or whether it was something else. I am telling you, it is something else. But you have to make the choice that Jobs made in that empty house in Woodside. Not the choice to feel better. Not the choice to find something safe and comfortable that will never hurt you again. The choice to go back to the work. to the specific, unreasonable, impractical, beautiful work that you were made to do. Not because it is guaranteed to succeed, not because the story will go the way you plan it, but because the alternative, the smaller life, the managed expectations, the careful avoidance of another, great loss is a kind of death that happens slowly and quietly and leaves no mark, except the permanent hag of knowing you did not try. Steve Jobs tried. After the humiliation and the grief and the months of paralysis in the haunted house, he tried. He picked up the work that he loved and he carried it forward even when no one was watching, and the world had already decided his best chapter was behind him. And the world was wrong. The world will be wrong about you too, if you let it. So here is your challenge. Not your suggestion, your challenge, starting today. Go back to the thing you walked away from when the last loss hit you. Not because it will be easy, because it will not. Not because you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. But because the thing that made you put it down in the first place, and the fear, the humiliation, the voice that said you already failed at this once and you cannot survive failing again, that voice is not the truth. That voice is the lock on the door. And you have the key. You have always had the key. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Stay in the work even when the work breaks you. Because the breaking is not the end. The breaking is where the light gets in. The breaking is where the next version of you, the one the world is waiting for, the one that could not exist without everything you have already been through, begins. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, and the day that happened was the best day of his life. Not because it did not hurt, because of what the hurt made possible. Your best day may be the one that right now feels like your worst. Trust the fall, trust the forge. And when you walk back through the door, and you will walk back through the door, make sure you come back as something the world has never seen before, because that is what you were always meant to become. Stay hungry, stay foolish, and never, never let them convince you that your story is over. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who is in their wilderness right now. Someone who needs to hear that the exile is not the end. It never was. It never is.